As the African Continental Free Trade Area begins to further integrate African economies, many people, including the AFCFTA's Secretary General Wamkela Mane, are drawing comparisons between the AFCFTA and the EU. Mane has praised the EU as the most successful integration story of our time. So what can the AFCFTA learn from the EU? Well, first, AFCFTA members should recognize that the adoption of a single market and free movement of people did a lot to increase free trade and labor mobility. Intra-European trade increased substantially as trade barriers fell and individuals found it much easier to work and travel abroad. Another lesson the AFCFTA can learn from the EU has to do with harmonizing regulations. While mutual recognition of other nations' regulation is usually preferable to reduce bureaucracy, if regulatory harmonization is adopted, the EU provides a good model. In the EU, regulatory harmonization simplified the process that businesses had to go through in order to trade with other states and help businesses operate across Europe. However, the AFCFTA can learn what it should not do by looking at the EU. Simply put, the AFCFTA must strive to avoid becoming what the EU is today, a huge bureaucratic machine that goes far beyond promoting free trade and labor movement. While the EU started as a free trade area and custom unions among 6 Western countries, it has developed into a vast supranational entity. It has its own flag, anthem, currency, 5 presidents and diplomatic service. In short, it has grown far beyond its original scope. One way the EU has grown out of control is in the area of overregulation. In 1986, following the Single European Act, European integration sped up as trade barriers within the EU were abolished. This was a good development, but over time, and especially after the 1992 Maastricht Treaty, hundreds of thousands of regulations have poured out of Brussels. Many of these regulations are not only bizarre, but detrimental to the lives of many Europeans. The maximum power of vacuum cleaner is regulated. The amount of power a toaster is allowed to consume is regulated. And believe it or not, drink manufacturers are not legally allowed to claim that water prevents dehydration. While these more humorous examples probably don't have enough impact on the bloc's competitiveness, there are many more serious regulations that have harmed EU economies. For example, at one stage in the 1980s, the Common Agricultural Policy, which provides agricultural subsidies, accounted for over 75% of the EEC's budget. At another point in time, by blurring the price signals between producers and consumers through large subsidies, the Common Agricultural Policy was responsible for mountains of butter and lakes of milk that was either destroyed or dumped in third world markets. In 2015, there was so much milk that the EU has paid farmers to stop producing it. Another economically and environmentally damaging policy that has come from Brussels is the Common Fisheries Policy. This program was intended to preserve the stock of fish in Europe's waters. Unfortunately, the policy had nearly the exact opposite effect. A Dutch study noted that fishermen would usually dump 2 to 4 tons of dead fish overboard for every 1 ton that was headed for consumption as to comply with EU quotas. Harmful, unforeseen consequences caused by ever-expanding bureaucracy is regrettable. Ultimately, the AFCFTA should look to the EU and recognize that while there are some policies like the removal of trade barriers, the free flow of labor, and the harmonizing of regulations that can really help the AFCFTA be successful, the AFCFTA should make sure to avoid becoming an over-regulated and expensive bureaucracy. By avoiding this, the AFCFTA will be able to significantly improve the lives of millions of Africans and help ensure the continent's prosperity for decades to come. To find out more about free trade, the benefits of greater free trade in Africa, some of the hurdles the AFCFTA must overcome, subscribe to the IATP YouTube channel and keep up to date with our work at www.theiatp.com.